Well, last Wednesday night, you may remember we devoted our entire time to talking about one of the few good kings of Judah, a man by the name of Jehoshaphat. And I got a little ahead of myself when I announced what we were going to be looking at tonight. You may remember I mentioned that we were going to be looking at the two Jehorims tonight. But I forgot that we have a king between those two. I've overlooked one. But also, as I mentioned tonight, is going to be the last time we're going to look at the kings for about 3 months, because next Wednesday night our summer series is going to begin. And I really want to encourage as many of you as possible to be here to support that. Invite others to come. We're really going to encourage other members of our congregation and our family and friends and community to be here to support that. Last year we had excellent lessons, excellent speakers, and I know this year will be no different. Most of the speakers that we have coming are ones that are going to be new to Pyburn Street, that haven't been here before. But we're kicking off with one who is very familiar to this congregation. I had someone request that we have Brother Mitch Walton come and speak one night, and he graciously agreed to kick off our summer series, and so he's going to start next Wednesday night, and then we'll continue each Wednesday night through the months of June, July, and August, having different speakers. And as we've been announcing, we do have flyers on the table out in the foyer. I encourage you to pick those up and distribute those, and let's do all that we can to gain some benefit from this for ourselves spiritually. Folks, we're talking about a wonderful subject, that of growing deeper in our spiritual life. We're talking about different areas where we can improve, where we can grow to a greater level. And it's just going to be a great series of lessons. And I encourage you to be here for that. And then when that ends, at the end of August, we will pick back up the first Wednesday night in September with our study of the Kings, and we'll continue from that point. As I said, we'll probably have a week or two of review just to get us back into the frame of mind of where we are in the history of the Kings, but then we'll pick back up where we leave off. Well, tonight we're going to leave Judah, we're going to go back to Israel, and we're going to discuss, at least first, Ahab's first son that succeeds him on Israel's throne, a man by the name of Ahaziah. One of the issues, though, that is going to take place with Ahaziah is going to be just like his mom and dad. He's evil. He's going to continue the wicked practices that they were involved in. And as I mentioned there in 1 Kings 21 through 24, you remember that God issued a decree to Ahab that all of his family were going to come to a tragic demise, but that these events would not begin until after Ahab's death. And so we're going to find those events beginning with Ahaziah. We're going to see that Ahaziah is going to come to a very tragic end just a short 2 years after he begins reigning. Well, Ahaziah becomes the king of the northern kingdom of Israel during Jehoshaphat's 17th year of reigning on the throne of Judah. And as I mentioned, he would reign for only 2 years. And the main thing that is remembered about him during this 2-year period is that he continued in the same evil practices as his parents. We're told in 1 Kings 22, verses 52 and 53, that he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. For he served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger, according to all that his father had done. Now, something that I find quite significant about this description, Ahaziah is the only one of the kings that we're going to find that it says that he walked in the ways not only of his father, but also of his mother. Well, the reason this is so significant is because Jezebel goes down in the annals of history of one of the most evil rulers that has ever lived. We know that she was the one that led her husband Ahab into many of the sinful practices that he engaged in. And so, her influence certainly would have been a strong one upon her son Ahaziah. And it shows the massive influence that this woman had, not only on her husband, but also upon all of the members of her family. Well, after Ahab died, we find that Moab, who up to this point was in somewhat of a peaceful agreement with Israel, they were under the oversight, so to speak, of Israel. They had been conquered by Ahab. But during this time of crisis, and we read this starting in 2 Kings chapter 1, we find that after Ahab dies, Moab decides, well, this is the time that we need to try to win our independence. During this time of difficulty, of transition, of crisis, we need to try to use this time when the kingdom is at its weakest, when they are without strong leadership, to try to come in and gain our victory. Well, something happened with Ahaziah. And the Bible does not give us a clear answer of exactly what transpired. Different commentators have given different suppositions as to what could have happened. But somehow Ahaziah, the text says, falls through a lattice. Now, some of the suppositions were this could have been a piece of lattice that had been placed over a window and he fell out of a window. Others say that it could have been something like a skylight and he was walking across the roof and didn't notice that he was walking across this lattice that had been placed over the skylight. But whatever happened and however it happened, we're told that he fell through this lattice. And as a result of this, he was badly injured. The text says that he became sick. Some have also surmised that possibly he was already ill and the illness was what caused him to fall. But I think the text lends itself more to the fact that this sickness was brought on by the injury that he had. He fell, he was injured. Well, after this injury, he decides that he wants to get some type of advice, some type of answer from a God. Notice I did not say from God, I said from a God. He wants to know if he's going to live or if he's going to die. Is he going to heal from his wounds and be able to continue reigning? And so what he does, he has some of his servants, some messengers, and he sends them to inquire of Beelzebub. Beelzebub was a Philistine false god, was an idol that had come to be worshipped quite prominently in Israel. And he sent those messengers to go and inquire before Beelzebub, am I going to be healed? Well, as the messengers are going along their way, an angel of the Lord appears to Elijah and tells Elijah to go and to head off these messengers and to deliver to them a message from the one true God. And to tell those messengers that they were to carry that message back to Ahaziah, not some type of message drummed up by the priests of Beelzebub. And so what takes place as they're traveling along, they come into contact with Elijah. Elijah relays this message to them from God and sends them back to Ahaziah. Well, when the messengers get back to Ahaziah and tell him this message that came from God, he asked them to describe the man that had given them this message. Well, they describe him in terms that were not flattering. They describe him as a hairy man that wore a leather belt. Well, immediately he knew who this was talking about. Immediately he knew that they were referring to Elijah. And so Ahaziah, he sends a company, a detachment of soldiers, out to get Elijah, to bring Elijah before him. Well, in a very interesting account, as we see there in 2 Kings 1, verses 5 through 12. This first detachment of soldiers, as they approach Elijah, demanding that he comes with them, God sends fire down from heaven and completely consumes all of those troops. Well, then Ahaziah sends out a second detachment of soldiers. The very same thing happened. Well, I can imagine by this time there probably were not any soldiers who were eager to go after Elijah again. But a third detachment is sent out. But the commander of those soldiers approaches Elijah in a different way. He doesn't come with pride, with arrogance, with haughtiness about him. He approaches him with humility. He asks Elijah to spare the troops, that they were simply coming as messengers from the king, that they were not there to bring any harm to him. And so they approached this situation from a much more humble fashion. Well, as a result of this, they were allowed to live, and Elijah agreed to go back with them to confront King Ahaziah. Well, Elijah goes with them. He comes before the king, and he relays the same message to the king as he had relayed to those messengers. And so Ahaziah, he comes to the end of his life in the very way that the Lord had spoken through Elijah. And 2 Kings 1:18 tells us that during those 2 years that he reigned, he did accomplish some other things, but those things were not chronicled. Those were things that were not seen as important to be remembered. And these are the only things that we're told about this wicked son of Ahab and Jezebel. Well, because Ahaziah died having no children, we're going to find that his younger brother, a man by the name of Jehoram, is now going to rise to the throne. But before we get to Jehoram, let me share just two brief applications, as we do from each king. The things that we can see from Ahaziah, folks, first and foremost, idols cannot help. Idols are powerless. God rebuked Ahaziah because he sent men to inquire of a powerless idol rather than the one true God. But another lesson that we can learn from this account, folks, we always need to approach God in a humble fashion. We see this in the example of this third commander. He approached the situation that was before him in a humble fashion. As a result of that, he was able to carry out the duties that had been placed upon him. But you know what we find in this account is a very sobering picture of what the writer of Hebrews calls a consuming fire. Talking about the wrath of God, a consuming fire in Hebrews 12, verses 28 through 29.